After the recent firing of Johnathon Majors from Marvel, and with rumors swirling for months about Kang being replaced in the MCU and the MCU potentially pivoting in a new direction, here are 10 villains that could come in and replace Kang. And some of these are already in the MCU. This is in no particular order of importance or likeliness or even my own personal desire to see, but nonetheless, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Kang Johnathon Majors situation. Should they recast? Should they replace? If so, who is a replacement you would like to see? Kicking off my list, we have the X-Men. I know this is a cheat because the X-Men aren't all villains and most of them actually aren't, but the X-Men are a big enough name that if Kevin Feige and Marvel came out and said, "We're changing the direction of the rest of Phase 5 and Avengers Kang Dynasty is now Avengers Mutant Invasion," or something along those lines. Yes, it would still have the wreak attached that is Johnathon Majors controversy, but you wouldn't have to see a new actor play the same part that we have seen for a few years now that was played by Majors. There would be really no fair comparisons between Kang and the X-Men. You could bring in the X-Men as these controversial figures upon the world or society or even whatever our Avengers team is going to be made up of. The X-Men characters have shown up here and there in the MCU for small cameos, but this would bring them into the forefront and the spotlight. And there's a lot of fans that have been waiting for the X-Men and to see how they will interact with the regular MCU characters. Now, I'm not totally sold on this idea. I understand that in Secret Wars, it would make a lot more sense to have guys like Hugh Jackmans Wolverine teaming up with Tobeys Spiderman and Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. That'd be a great way to kind of end this saga and do a little bit of a reset in the future, but that was kind of under the impression they'd be fighting a character like Kang. Now, all of that is just rumors, nothing concrete, but it does kind of throw things up in the air. Number 9, we have Ren Slayer in the TVA.
Nice.
Still not totally clear if we are getting a Loki Season 3, but the showrunner and writers have stated that it was always intended to be a 2-season show. That story was 1 book with 2 chapters, and then when you watch it, it actually feels that way too. So Loki Season 2 is also the only MCU show that underwent no major rewrites, reshoots, which was very cool. But without going into spoilers, if you haven't seen that show, the TVA and a variant version of Ren Slayer with the TVA, how to eliminate the MCU's timeline could be something very interesting. The TVA has decided that maybe our timeline needs to be destroyed. Number 8, we have the Celestials with the rebirth of Icarus. Now, Eternals is obviously one of the more disappointing MCU films for a lot of people. I liked it for the most part, but it does have a lot of flaws. The movie itself did not do well at the box office, was not executed to the degree it needed to be to introduce all of these characters and the lore, the stories about them across time, the Celestials, how the Eternals are created. It easily could have been a great Disney Plus series with that much content. However, there are plenty of people that went into Avengers Infinity War with how much money that movie made that never saw either of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. So you can still use the Celestials and the Eternals, even though not a lot of people liked or saw those movies. You can still use the Eternals and specifically Icarus. Now, he's not Superman level strength. I'm sure Captain Marvel could probably just whoop him real quick, but that's what a lot of us were also worried about with Thanos as well. So Richard Madden's an awesome actor. The Eternals and Celestials have a lot of interesting lore with Jack Kirby developing a lot of it, and if you're wanting to go bigger than Kang, you can't get much bigger than a Celestial. Number 7, we have the Sentry. Now, this is a character in the comics that sometimes is portrayed on many different power levels and at times could be easily one of the most powerful characters in Marvel Comics, depending on which version of the Sentry they're going to use. He could be that way in the MCU as well. There are rumors that Steven Yeun is going to be playing the Sentry in Thunderbolts, so it wouldn't be a totally crazy idea. I don't know if they would use him as a big bad villain or more of a hero or an anti-hero, but if they did want to use a Superman-like character that doesn't need Celestials as well, Sentry would be a good choice. Number 6, we have a familiar one in Ultron. I hear more and more each year fans of this character wanting to see the return of Ultron. It's kind of a shame that we only got him for one film, and although he had a great ending with Vision, and without Ultron we never would have gotten Vision most likely. So if they decided to never use Ultron again, I guess I wouldn't be super upset because of how good I thought his ending was. But seeing Ultron in What If just makes you wonder what could have been. We know these variants of every character in the MCU, basically. We know there is variants of pretty much every character in the MCU, so it's not impossible for any of these characters to return or debut for basically any reason thanks to the multiverse. It wouldn't necessarily even need to be James Spader voicing him, but that would be pretty great. I don't think Age of Ultron is the best MCU movie, but it wasn't the worst. And Ultron was cool enough, could have been more menacing. And if they were going to use him again, I'd like to see that. Number 5, we have Galactus. Now, up front, this isn't a character I know a whole lot about, but kind of like the Sentry, the Skrulls, Spider-Man, Namor, the Fantastic Four, X-Men, Galactus. He's another one of those characters that basically in the beginning of Phase 2, fans have been waiting and wondering when Galactus will show up. He's another Jack Kirby, Stan Lee creation that would also make a lot of sense to show up in the nearby future, with the Fantastic Four just around the corner. He's a big villain to introduce. Again, if you're wanting to go bigger than Kang, a celestial or a cosmic-like entity is bigger. Is it more interesting? I don't know. I don't really know the character, so I'll leave that up to you. Number 4, we have the Beyonder. Another character I didn't grow up reading comics based off of, but the Beyonder is an infamous member of the Beyonder race. He was not aware of other Beyonders and misinterpreted his personal universe as everything in existence. He poked a hole into the Beyonders universe, which allowed him to observe Earth, and then he went on to start various different versions of Secret Wars. That is basically a summary of everything I know about this character, but I repeatedly see him talked about online. I know there's people out there with vast more knowledge on this character and can probably articulate why they think he should be Kang's replacement. I think it makes sense, again, if they're wanting something bigger and badder, which isn't necessarily what I always want, but he does already have connections to Secret Wars as well as Fantastic Four, so it makes sense. Number 3, we have Apocalypse in Avengers Age of Apocalypse, or a closer adaptation to the comic run than the X-Men Apocalypse version of the character.
That's stupid! You're stupid! Stop being stupid!
I think that Apocalypse can absolutely work in the MCU. Yes, Apocalypse, Thanos, Darkseid, they all kind of have similar looks and sometimes some similar abilities. However, all 3 characters are quite vastly different, honestly. If you can get a director like the Russo brothers, who are not household names by any means, and really still aren't outside the MCU, to do Avengers 5 and give the MCU's next big bad a unique, compelling, relatable backstory or motivation, I think any of the characters on this list can work. Even if Apocalypse has been done before, he's an awesome villain for the X-Men. He could be an awesome villain for the MCU. Coming in at number 2, we have Doctor Doom. This is a guy who instantly is more recognizable and iconic to Marvel fans as well as the general movie-going audience due to the fact that he's been in multiple movies, he's been featured in a few games, he's had big iconic storylines in the comics, and he's just quite frankly a bigger name in comics than Kang the Conqueror, and he'd be a good choice as a replacement. There are, yes, many arguments against this, and me personally, I'm not the world's biggest fan of this character, so I'm not terribly attached to this idea, but I am far more interested and invested in Doctor Doom than I am Kang the Conqueror at this point. And really, even before all of the drama with Majors, it would be a great way to introduce the Fantastic Four and make them instantly needed in the greater expanding MCU. And I think it would make a lot of fans pretty happy. And finally, at number 1, we have Magneto. This is definitely my favorite character on this list, and quite honestly is just one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. I loved both interpretations of him on the big screen, but I do recognize that we are probably going to be on our 3rd in the MCU if the rumors are in fact not true and the MCU is planning on using Magneto after all. We never got a moment with Eric meeting his son.
And you? I'm here for my family too.
Maybe we could get something like that in the MCU, just not for only fan service purposes, but to really add complexity to both sides of the conflict in the fact that Magneto's children would probably end up working against him in most scenarios. And even if they did, you always have that brother-like bond and rivalry between Magneto and Professor X, so they don't need to instantly introduce a new Professor X as soon as if they were to introduce an MCU version of Magneto, but I do believe that both characters serve each other well and the story very well, especially when they are both together. And if one is there, they both should be there, in my opinion. If you want a change up in comic book movies, I think having an interesting villain who, like Thanos, has a complex motivation, who's relatable, who's believable, it doesn't need to be the most powerful character in the universe either. Look at Loki in the first Avengers movie. He got the crap beat out of him all the time. That's why I think a guy like Icarus could work. He's not Superman, but he's strong enough to be intimidating, that's for sure. And I think that is one thing that has been truly lacking in several comic book movies of the past few years, and even this year included, with a few exceptions. There's a lot of characters on this list, but I'm sure I didn't mention some of the ones you were probably thinking of, so let me know down in the comments below who those characters are. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, as 99% of our viewers are not subscribed, and if we could even change that by a fraction, we could start cranking out a lot more of these videos for you. Thank you so much for watching, and happy holidays to all of you.